Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Michelle White. On this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, we'll talk about King Charles III's visit to the nation's capital, Trump's tariffs on the EU cars and trucks, and what are his plans for Cuba? All that and more. Stay with us. Hi, and we are with Mark Angelides, editor-in-chief of Liberty Nation and the normal host of this show, and I'm subbing for him today. So we're reversing seats. Mark, thanks for joining us.
That's all right. There's no such thing as a day off.
That's true. That's true. I'm putting you to work today. So we have a lot to talk about. The king was here last week, so I want to dive into that. And then
hmm
also the tariffs, the EU car and truck tariffs that President Trump is starting today, and the troops coming out of Germany. So which one of those do you want to start with?
Let's start with possibly my least favorite subject is the monarchy. Uh, and I think that's probably a good place to start because in terms of, I mean, this obviously it's America's 250th birthday this year, America 250, Liberty 250, as we like to call it.
Right.
Um, but I think the fact that we kind of bookended this. So we had the separation, and now we've got this coming together because it is a coming together. And yes, relations have been greatly strained between Britain and the UK of late. Um, but having King Charles III or King Charles the 111th, as Ilhan Omar might call him, having him come at this time, I think that reinforces that the relationship between the two countries does go beyond partisan politics. And although we sometimes get very much swept into the maelstrom of, you know, this party's in power, so this person's out of favor, back and forth.
Mhm.
Um, I think it's possibly the only advantage to having a monarchy in the UK is that there's something stable that's beyond the cut and thrust of partisan politics. Kings and queens used to have actual power,
Right.
and now they don't. They don't really have any power. I believe the remaining powers of the monarch are they have the right to be informed of what the government's doing, and they have the right to give their opinion on what the government's doing, and that's about it. But what you have to remember is King Charles isn't just the king of the United Kingdom. You know, he's the king of I think 13 other countries, and he's also the head of the Commonwealth, which
Mhm.
is like 56 countries, 54 or 56 countries
Mhm.
in total. So he represents something broader than just, you know, what's happening in Westminster on a day-to-day basis. And obviously, Donald Trump and King Charles, they've known each other for at least 20 years.
Right.
Um, I don't know how friendly their relationships are because these are people who have spent the last 20 years in the almost the highest positions that a country can offer.
Right.
Um, Even Donald Trump, obviously, in the business world and
Right.
television world. Uh, and so I don't know just how friendly you can be in those situations, but as far as professional courtesy between the two men, and as far as always trying to have America's or England's best interests at the forefront of what they're doing, I think that's undisputable. And so the two of them coming together, you know, there's a history there. They do seem to get on. I don't think anybody's really seriously suggested that there's a lot of animosity between the two men. They do seem to get on quite well.
Right.
Well
And
enough to joke.
Trump doesn't
Yeah.
hide it if he doesn't like you.
No, he really doesn't. He really
There's no
doesn't.
way to second guess.
No. And I think you can tell a truly good relationship because people can gently mock each other, you
Right.
know, to their faces and know that you're not going to take what I say too seriously. And that's what happened both ways um, between the in the and yeah, I think that shows that the relationship still is strong despite what is happening in British politics currently, which is an utter disaster.
Faster. And that was the overall feeling that I got.
Sure.
It's he's here to do a PR move because Starmer's in
Mm,
hot water and he needs to come over and clean up Starmer's mess. However, I agree
yeah.
with everything you have said, but one thing I went over his speech with a fine-tooth comb, and I've never actually heard him speak before because he's not consequential to my life or to the US. So I've never
Well,
heard him
what do you do after Christmas dinner at 3 p.m.?
never
Except
heard
listen
him
to the
speak.
King's speech.
Nope,
Uh,
never heard him speak. So I was
yeah.
impressed. I was not impressed, but surprised at how soft-spoken he was. I guess I expected a bolder voice, but there
Mm.
was a jab in there when he
Oh
said,
yeah,
"Ignore the clarion call to look inwardly," which was
sure.
probably his British way of saying, "Don't be a nationalist," and a kind of a
Okay.
jab at MAGA. And so I didn't there were a few other sprinkled things in there, but that was definitely one.
Mm.
Or, when he talked about freedom of religion for all, and you and I could probably debate this for hours, but the way he's treating the Christians versus the Muslims in the UK is different. So there were a few of those jabs that I thought
Mm.
he definitely got in there. But
Sure.
I was impressed with his humor when he said 250 years ago, or as we say in the UK, just the other day. So,
Yeah.
that was kind of cute. So, and he has to be cute though. He has to warm up the Americans who are generally against a monarchy.
Sure.
So there's that
Well,
jab.
sorry, I'll interrupt you there. So Americans, yes, absolutely against the idea of a monarchy,
Hmm.
which is notable, right? So they've got all these people, the No Kings protest, all these
Right.
Democrats at the No
I was
Kings
getting to
protest.
that. Yeah.
No Kings, except for this one,
Except for
you
this
know,
one, where they all
except for
give
this
him a
one.
standing ovation,
Sure.
which was
Now I get the point that they're making. I get the point that they're making that there's no kings, running the United States. That's why he fought the war, right? That's exactly what it was all about. But it's like congratulations on it. It really is. The No Kings movement is the most successful political movement in history because they've had their rally and look, America doesn't have a king. I'm so impressed with how effective these people are. And all it takes is, millions of dollars from left-wing philanthropists, and of course, a smattering of cash, taxpayer cash, courtesy of third-party NGOs or
right.
quangos quasi-governmental organizations because they can't exist without the government teat.
Right.
Um, so yeah,
Operation.
yeah,
I think
so three cheers for the No Kings protest. They are very successful. It's amazing, just amazing
you
what
know
they've
what would be
achieved.
fun is if they had a No Kings protest outside of the White House or Congress the week that King Charles was there. That would have been hilarious, but of course they didn't do that.
Of course, but the
It
funny
didn't
thing
work for
is,
them.
just to kind of wrap this up. So we say that Brits aren't enamored, sorry, Americans aren't enamored with a king, and that's true for themselves, absolutely. But they are somewhat enamored on a certain spectrum, political spectrum. They are enamored with the royalty. I mean, people in England don't really care what happens to Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. They don't care. They're gone. They're out of our midst. And yet, Netflix, the TV
Right.
shows, the books, the podcasts, they are being lapped up by an American audience at a rate that Brits generally think is quite shameful. I got to be honest, because
Yeah.
there
It is shameful.
there is something that appeals, but it's far beyond it's far below and far beyond politics, and I wish it would stay even further below. There's a fascinating book, and I won't name it because we don't want foul language on the show, but they something you up, which is based on a Philip Larkin poem. They something you up your mum and dad. They may not mean to, but they do.
Mhm.
And it's about how children are so shaped by their parents.
Parents.
And
Yeah.
he does the author, Oliver James, he does a bit of a case study on Prince Charles. And he talks about his upbringing. Now, as the firstborn, he was destined for the throne. But his father, Prince Philip, um, was really very, very harsh with him. He purposely sent this child who was of let's say, a light disposition to one of the roughest places to be educated because he thought that as the ruler of the kingdom, he's going to need to be tough. And so it was actually encouraged around the dinner table, not only the school that, he would spend nights being beaten by the other children
Oh
because,
my God.
why not, right? They get to beat the future king of England. Uh,
Wow.
But then around the dinner table, he and his sister would mock him for his lack of equestrian skills, and they would mock him at the dinner
Right.
table. And so this personality that is a very quiet, very reserved person who bear in mind, for he's late coming to the kingship,
Right.
right? He's very late coming to the kingship, but has spent 70 years being told that you have a duty to do. And then he's got this very quiet, calm persona, um, where, most of us would fall apart in that kind of situation, with
Right.
that kind of upbringing. And yet here he is doing, his duty. And yes, he takes a couple of jabs at, let's not look outwards, let's look inwards. But you have to remember he is an internationalist because he's not just the king of the United Kingdom.
Right, but
So,
he's talking to
so there's
people
that.
who are not, he's talking to people who are very inwardly thinking. I mean, Americans in general are insular.
Not a bad way to be. Winston Churchill said, if we have to
Right.
choose between Europe and the open sea.
He's speaking another language, literally and figuratively, to Americans in Congress when he says, let's ignore the clarion call to look inwardly. And I think MAGA supporters and Trump supporters would take that as a jab because
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
we're going to take a short break and come right back with Mark Angelides to talk about Trump's tariffs on EU cars and trucks and his drawdown of troops in Germany. Stay with us.